there's this great, I have it pinned up somewhere on my wall. This bit from Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. It has this wonderful excerpt from it on being in Cambridge, sort of being almost sort of seasick from walking around on this shifting ship of a place that really puts you into this dizzying spiral if you're not incredibly careful and level-headed coming into it. I definitely did not come in incredibly careful and level-headed. I came in naive and open-hearted. There clearly is something about this place that's not working right if so many people emerge from it with serious mental health issues at the end.
Are the harbour bells of Cambridge, whose fountains in moonlight and closed courts and cloisters, whose enduring beauty in its virtuous, remote self-assurance, seemed part less of the loud mosaic of one's stupid life there, though maintained perhaps by the countless deceitful memories of such lives, than the strange dream of some old monk 800 years dead, a dream jealously guarded, keep off the grass, and yet whose unearthly beauty compelled one to say, God forgive me. Cambridge was the sea reversed. At the same time, a horrible regression. But the heart sickened at running once more full tilt into the past. It was as though that experience of the sea, also exaggerated by time, had invested one with the profound inner maladjustment of the sailor who can never be happy on land.
I think there's an issue of mental health concerns and mental health issues at all universities around the country. Cambridge most certainly is no exception to that.
More than 1 in 4 people experience some form of mental health disorder in their life. And if you exclude dementia from that, more than 75% of those will manifest before the age of 18.
Students as a group within the population are more at risk, if I can put it that way, for mental health difficulties. So I don't think that's necessarily unique to Cambridge. It may be sort of specific to the transition to independence.
Students at Cambridge at clinical level are not more mentally ill than students at other universities. I'm willing to believe that there are higher levels of perception of depression, anxiety, mental ill health among Cambridge students. There are 2 ways of defining it essentially, and you tend to see this in student surveys. People who are experiencing feelings of depression and anxiety, and people who are clinically depressed. And there's quite a gulf between those two. Around about 10% of the age roughly 18 to 25 population are likely to be suffering from mental ill health at some clinical level, and that's about the level here in Cambridge. If you look at students defining themselves, somewhere between half and 2/3 of Cambridge students typically would say that they'd experience feelings of depression.
As far as I'm aware, when people say situational or temporal depression, what they actually are referring to is what we now call adjustment disorder. It's a maladaptive reaction to an identifiable psychosocial stressor or multiple stressors that causes significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other areas of functioning. Implying that someone has minor depression is not as severe as major depression is not true. They're different entities. And both should be taken as seriously as each other.
And I think there are particular reasons why there may be particular concerns about mental health issues at Cambridge.
I think for a lot of people that I've talked to, but also specifically for myself, the myth of the university is really what becomes overwhelming after a while.
People have been, many young people have been aiming for Cambridge or, a similar high-prestige university during their school, as if it's like the goal that's going to make their lives perfect.
Not only do we feel that we've landed ourselves this gig at one of these, the most prestigious places that you could possibly end up at, that has certain connotations of, do I belong here? I've been given this enormous privilege, and so who am I to sit here and wallow over what I'm feeling and wallow over the kind of state of mind that I'm slowly descending into.
You could almost feel locked into that goal, and then having arrived and got here, you might almost experience it as a trap that, you don't really have the freedom to consider leaving or intermitting, because everyone expects that having got here, you'll be making the most of this amazing opportunity. And in that way, sometimes your dream can also trap you.
I spent a lot of time trying to pick apart the myth of Cambridge and trying to pick apart the way that that's impacted me mentally and physically and just even academically.
People got into Cambridge because you were the kids in school who went home and read extra and because it was fun. Us as individuals, we want to push ourselves as well.
It's putting a bunch of people together who from the start are more likely to be kind of perfectionists and hold themselves to unfair standards, to begin with, right?
The environment that Cambridge has created over the years attracts people who are sort of very passionate about what they do, but they're also oftentimes very insecure, and they're very driven by academic success. They tie their success to their self-esteem.
Students are so perfectionist and they're not happy to have work in that isn't perfect, but they've got to turn it over really fast. I've got a feeling that that's probably unique to maybe Cambridge and Oxford.
They put in too much pressure on themselves, and I don't necessarily think that's Cambridge's fault. A lot of it is down to the individuals themselves.
I think the environment that's created here exacerbates whatever is already existing, and can poke and prod people to a point where something flares up that they didn't really know was there before.
Some pressure is helpful. Some anxiety helps build performance.
Well, we don't want cotton wool here. Yeah. We want to say to people, the world is full of competitive, stressful occasions, and finals will not be the last one that you experience, but here's strategies for how to deal with it.
I can't say to students, come here, it'll all be lovely and you'll never feel under pressure, because that would be totally ridiculous. And they're not going to perform at their best unless it's like that. And I think the other thing that we have to be realistic about as well is the extent to which student unhappiness is part of life. Life does involve being unhappy a fair bit of the time, and we can't make that go away.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, everybody would be here. But, this is Cambridge. This is what has always been done, and to be honest, the results speak for themselves.
Success at Cambridge should mean being the best that you can be in the life you bring with you to Cambridge and the life you lead at Cambridge.
Well, my personal view on that is success at Cambridge would be to get the best grade you could possibly get. That is, if you've come in and you've got a poor average 2-1, for instance, but deep down you could have got first, no one will call that success. You've let yourself down.
In my experience, amongst the academic community of Cambridge, very two distinct groups of people. There's one group who are incredibly supportive, and they think it's fantastic what you're doing, and they love hearing about the rowing. On the other hand, there's a sort of group who the complete antithesis of that. I remember being told by an academic that if you want to get a first or do well in your exams, then you can't row.
I do remember I was supporting somebody who happened to turn up in sports kit because they were having a kickabout at 5 p.m. Their supervisor latched right onto it and said, "Oh, it's really weird that, you know, you've come to me and you said you're struggling with supervisions, but you come to me and you've just been playing football." And I was just like, it's 5 p.m. He's been playing football for an hour. That's literally just downtime.
We're training 5-6 times a week, we're playing matches. The varsity matches obviously got all the media hype around it, so it does put those extra pressures on. I can't speak for everyone, but in my personal experience, I would say it makes it so much better because you've got an escape from your work.
Societies should occupy a space whereby people can feel welcome in a group of people, no matter where they are, who they are, where they come from.
In terms of mental health, I think we rely on each other a lot.
We spend so much time together, and therefore we're a pretty tightly knit group. I do believe that it's our duty to our friends in choir to work together to support them and to look after them, and I hope that everyone in choir would agree with me.
It's my outlet, it's where I have my fun, where I meet my friends, and I think there's quite a lot of research into the fact that sport helps your mental health. You're kind of getting a double benefit.
I think it's a little sad how rowing has been such a big part of my life at Cambridge, and I feel that if I'm talked to an academic or a supervisor about it, then I'm taking a risk in terms of which way they're going to go. Are they going to support me with this, or are they going to deliberately make my life difficult? And that's something that people had told me very early on, like, oh, it's almost like a secret that you have to keep. Yeah, I mean, my DOS of 3 years here, as far as I'm aware, still doesn't know that I row. Yeah. It's just a bit weird, I guess.
So I think that some academics and actually students alike feel like it's kind of a rite of passage, it's a stamp of pride when you're having a really tough time.
And some of my favourite quotes are from my friend who actually did psychology this year, experimental psychology, and the lecturers would literally be lecturing about stress, and you would be thinking, are you listening to this? Is the university actually listening to its own research? Because stress does not get the best out of people in the levels that Cambridge puts it on.
Yeah, an academic once said to me, thinking that it was hilarious, that he likes to make sure that his PhD students go through a near-death experience before they finish their PhD, and then he passes them.
I mean, there were certainly periods of time where I would spend insane amounts of time in the library revising and just kind of pushing yourself through sheer force of will.
When it came to doing my finals at Cambridge, it came down to 4 exams in 5 days, 2 of which were on the same day. All that mattered was these 4 exams was one of the worst weeks of my life. I didn't feel like it represented the work that I'd done and the progress I'd made over the 3 years in my degree.
It's one of the busiest times of my year. I've had students with glandular fever, acute tonsillitis, gastroenteritis, various things like this. And that's talking about the physical things, never mind stress and anxiety. To have worked so hard for 3 or 4 years and get to the point where you're not fit to do your exams, you're not well enough to actually revise, that is a huge pressure for a student and really disappointing, I think, for everybody.
If the foundations aren't fully strong, if there's some cracks in the foundation, then putting that amount of pressure onto it is obviously just going to make the whole thing collapse. And unfortunately, I've had personal experience of people collapsing. I think it's not that infrequent an occurrence. I think it's significant enough that people kind of are aware that that's sort of a background thing, and for people to claim otherwise, I think is, I don't want to say it's ignorant, because I think that's unfair. I think maybe they just don't want to accept that there is this issue.
I think I look at my class at biochemistry, was only about 24 of us, and the top 3 students there have all left and done PhDs in London because they wanted to get out, and they did not want to stay in Cambridge, they did not want to stay in the environment.
One that probably everyone says, I think the workload is immense.
A bit of a joke amongst my friends that there are always people crying in the library.
It's not really that funny, actually.
Excess workload in some subjects.
After my first term, I basically done an entire first year chemistry, biochemistry and physiology course.
I didn't realise till I came here just how hard the student worked.
The intensity of the competition.
In my first term, I had 16 essays in 8 weeks.
A particular competitive, intense environment.
8-week periods of chronic stress and anxiety and worries.
The shortness of the
terms.
Very short terms.
Horrible fucking bullshit. Why are they so short?
Constant stress.
Pressure cooker of
Cambridge workload.
Heavy workload.
Highly intense.
Exam pressures.
Stressful environment.
Stress.
workload in Cambridge is
Super intense.
Very stressful.
Exhausting.
astronomical.
Pressure.
Pressure.
Could not keep up.
Pressure.
High workload.
Pressure.
Stress.
Stress.
Having been through the 3 years, the impact that it had on my mental health at times, and like the level of like not being myself that I was a lot of the time here, I'm still not entirely sure that staying was the best idea.
OCD is needing to check 7 times if the light switch is off before you leave the house. Really, obsessive compulsive disorder is about doubt, and it's about sort of preying on the thing that you're most insecure about. I would have really graphic images enter my mind, and just uncomfortable sensations in my body and all sorts of it. Really, truly, I mean, feeling like I was trapped in sort of my own flesh prison. I remember lying on the sofa that summer and just staring at the ceiling and thinking, I really feeling like I couldn't move and feeling like I would really, really like to be dead. I mean, I wrote a note to my parents. I was just sort of like, this is too much, and I will have to end it.
I guess coming to Cambridge University, I had the same anxieties and nerves that everyone would have, and I was anxious about my exams like everyone else. And it wasn't until maybe my second year that me being anxious about every exam and me being anxious about every day and me being anxious and nervous and scared about doing anything that I started to realise that maybe this wasn't like everyone else.
And when I got here, I was really optimistic for the first few weeks here. I was working really hard to get my essays in on time. And I wasn't meeting a deadline by, sort of a matter of an hour or two. And my supervisor, I mean, he started calling me out on it, just saying, you clearly haven't read enough for this week. And as someone who had come in with a specific learning disability, I was sort of saying to him, I'm reading as much as I physically can in a week.
In my second year, I had my first real case of a panic attack, which I would not advise anyone having. It's terrifying. I've been in a very fortunate situation. My director of studies have both been medics themselves, with an influence within the college to vouch for me. I say that I feel very lucky because I know not very many people do. And in my experience and speaking with other people, sometimes how good your mental health is isn't necessarily how good your college is or how good your subject is, but how good is the person who's willing to vouch for you is, if there is one.
Pastoral care always has to be a concern of ours. It's not something that we can ever hive off and say, I'm just here for your intellectual needs.
Cambridge students are young adults in residential communities of young adults and some slightly older adults too. and we have a duty of care for each and every one of those adults.
Here we do have multiple levels of support.
It's really important that students are able to navigate what I know is a complex picture, but we, those who are providing the advice, the guidance and the support, need to ensure that we are all working together to ensure that that guidance and support is available where it is needed.
Directors of studies are really there to provide academic support. Now, they should have some awareness around student mental health issues, but it's fundamentally not their job.
Senior tutors are responsible for the educational provision that colleges provide, but there's also a welfare side of that. So senior tutors are responsible for the welfare provision of the college too.
So you have a team of tutors.
Tutors are meant to be your head of pastoral care.
There are some college-based counsellors.
Friendly Porter's Lodge that at 2 o'clock in the morning...
They are just somebody to talk to.
Who may eventually end up advising you to speak to your college nurse.
And then I will signpost them to the counselling services.
Our primary focus is to offer counselling support to the student.
And college welfare officers are usually a student who first finds out that others are considering self-harm.
But there's also the Senior Tutors Committee.
One of the subcommittees of the Senior Tutors Committee, the Welfare and Finance Standing Committee.
The Committee on Student Health and Wellbeing.
Disability Resource Centre.
Students' Unions Advice Service.
And then there are student organisations.
Organisations like Student Mind exist to fill in gaps and to be a friendly face that doesn't judge.
I feel like that even meeting with my tutor now, and he'll say, well, you know, I don't know what you expect me to do, or I go to him with something that I've heard from the Student Advice Service and the Disability Resource Center. They say, you know, you should apply for an exam warning. And I say, okay, I'll apply for an exam warning. And I go and ask my tutor if I can apply for an exam warning. And he says, well, we don't do those anymore. And I say, okay, well, this list of people has told me that you do these still, and that it's a good idea to have one, given, you know, my circumstance, and that is what I'm trying to do now. And he said, well, I don't know if they know what they're talking about.
The impenetrableness of it is one of the biggest problems, especially for disabled students, because I feel like you hit these kind of blocks on the way that just drain your energy out and you kind of give up.
And it's too easy to get lost in the system. I've got friends I can think of who did pursue the routes available to them to get help for what they were going through, and it worked up until a point after which the college stopped following up with them and they were kind of just forgotten about.
So basically I came to Cambridge as a student with like a pre-existing sort of mental health situation. Like I had like diagnosis, I had treatment and stuff like that. So I was just sort of floundering. It was just me, this one tiny person.
I wind up in this weird position where I feel like I'm advocating for myself in this way, where I'm getting on people's nerves and being a nuisance, and I feel like I'm a burden.
It feels really chaotic to keep reading the guidance and stuff that's given. And when you see it on paper, it looks really simple. It says just go to your college nurse or go to your DOS, and for them that not to actually help is really tough, yeah.
There's a huge amount of bureaucracy that feels so cold and impersonal, and just almost, I almost just want to cry when I open some emails, because they're sort of like, I can't believe you're asking me this again. I'm like, well, I don't know unless I ask. I don't know any of this unless I ask. And I've been in bed for 4 weeks and not talking to anyone and not really eating. I mean, that is not the optimal time to be a self-advocate.
If you have mixed anxiety, depression, depressive disorders, any compulsive disorders, if you came into contact with someone who was, I'm really sorry, I don't know, that feels like a wall.
You know, the thing is, like, I'm already deeply ashamed of it. Like, I'm not going into these situations thinking, oh, great, like, I'm going to get out of what I need to do by asking for an extension or whatever now. No, I'm coming in genuinely feeling terrible. And I don't always know if I can quite convince people that I am feeling that way, but like it's real every time. And to go into those situations and to sort of have to grovel almost and beg for support, or to go through this really lengthy process of documentation where you're sort of guilty until proven innocent, that doesn't contribute to anything feeling any better.
So I intermitted at the start of my final year of medicine. It was off the back of me struggling with some of my exams that I was doing at the time that I needed to carry on with my degree. It was excruciating to come to that conclusion.
I wasn't handing in things on time at all at that point, and I just got out of that whole experience like you just need to do better. You need to figure out how to do better. You need to, you know, everyone's struggling here, and you need to sort out how to make yourself work in this environment. And I just thought, well, okay, I can't do that.
If we're intermitting somebody because we don't think they're well enough to be here. They're really struggling. They recognise that they're really struggling, and there is a good prospect with the right period of time away and the right support when they're away, they can come back in a much stronger position.
The assessment is done holistically with the student right at the centre of the assessment, having regard to medical evidence and academic evidence.
Everyone said, no, don't intermit, you know, it's better for you if you can just get through it. I think it was really frustrating for me for a while because I felt like, regardless of whether or not they intended to, I felt like I had to fight to be able to intermit. I know there's some colleges that push people to intermit, and that's problematic in its own way, of course, but I really felt like it was tough for me to convince people that maybe I shouldn't be here.
When I was eventually called in and they were like, you are going to intermit, it was presented as a question, but I had run out of resources by that point. It was basically a disciplinary measure. And they gave me about 2 days, basically. You have to get out by this weekend, bring all your stuff home.
Students feeling isolated when they intermit, this is a common occurrence. It's something that I think we need to be very alert to in the university. And I think it's probably fair to say that there are times, a student has intermitted, so far as you know they are pursuing the course of treatment or support that they need, you're probably not as quick getting back to them about things as you would be with a fresh, urgent case who's just walked in through the door.
As the process went on, then it becomes really, again, so dependent on who your director of studies is and who your support are, because the process of intermission is just you leave and you're off the register and you don't go to any classes, and then in 12 months' time or an agreed upon amount of time, you come back.
The idea that they have of it is that people go away and all their problems get fixed in that year and they come back and it's fine and nobody has to deal with anything.
Fall off the conveyor belt and you have no idea what to do. What happens to your funding? What happens to your student loan? What happens to your room? What happens to your exam? No one says anything about that unless you have someone.
One of the really terrible things that my college did, their particular attitude was, you are causing problems for your friends and we don't want that to happen. They strongly encouraged me to talk less to my friends. Because obviously my friends were all still there and I spent a lot of time frightened to go back into college, just as members of the public are allowed to visit, for example. But I felt really intimidated from going back. If my friends in college had been able to believe that I was being taken well care of by the college, they wouldn't feel like they had to look out for me so much. They wouldn't be so worried.
I did, to an extent, feel forgotten. Maybe if you'd checked, things wouldn't have gotten bad again.
I should say that senior tutors have been working really hard on intermission, and we've developed guidance to ensure that students know exactly how to concentrate on getting the support they need during the intermission, whether that's in Cambridge or elsewhere, and are properly equipped to come back at the end of their period of intermission to resume their studies. The senior tutor in a college is responsible for working closely with the student, tutor, medical experts to ensure that that package of advice and support and the right decision is made in the right way.
One of the students that we interviewed in the past week for this documentary kind of raised concerns about going off the grid on intermission and feeling quite disconnected from college life in the year or however many months of intermission. I was wondering what you thought about that.
I think more what I've said, I regret that, but I think what I've just said kind of covers that, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
we have to say to ourselves, consistently, have we checked on that person? And I think there's probably an area where we could do a little bit better in the university. But equally, we have to be realistic about the amount of pressure that we're under in terms of time and resource. We have to be realistic about the extent of resource that we have available. And if we've got to significantly grow this amount of money, what do we shrink instead? We can't simply grow the cake. There is certainly something close to a crisis in terms of demand and resource. Spending has gone up by over 40% across 4 years. Now, clearly, you cannot sustain an additional 10% a year on an ongoing basis.
University counselling service is excellent, but resourcing is always a problem.
We're very lucky to be well-resourced as we are here.
There's a lot of pressure to put on a small counselling service. Do we need more resources there? More counsellors, basically?
Cambridge has a terrifically well-funded university counselling service.
But the counselling service and the Disability Resources Centre often, at busy, stressful times, they kind of reach the limits of what they can do.
There is evidence to suggest that when people think it's underfunded, they don't use it, and that's really upsetting, that even though if it is underfunded, I don't want anybody to go away thinking that they shouldn't use it, or that there is someone more in need, or that there is, you should be dissuaded by anything like waiting times. Please, no matter what I say now, if you need to, please go.
Cambridge is a wealthy institution, but it's not that wealthy, and it doesn't have unlimited cash flow. And we can all point to individual things and say, well, this shows an institution where there is a lot of fat that could be cut. But actually in lots of colleges, lots of the time, and certainly in faculties and departments, there really isn't very much fat to be cut.
I was wondering how much you think there might be a disparity between the provisions that certain colleges can provide for students.
All I'd say, Lucy, that Murray Edwards has a distinctive character, but every senior tutor in every college recognises that every student in Cambridge has a right to equivalent support.
Another major issue is the lack of counselling or the disparity in counselling across colleges. And then the issue becomes, can colleges afford it? And this is kind of the crux of many of the issues.
That's the thing, it's the luck of the draw about, and it shouldn't be. Your student experience and your mental health should not be decided upon which tutor you get. Pure and simple.
Telling people about my mental health issues here, about specific learning disabilities, about depression, about OCD. I got everything from, the sort of, oh, I'm sorry that's happening to you, to, are you just making that up? You might just be lazy. I remember lying on my floor in first year and just thinking, what am I doing here? Which I think is a common thing. And my supervisor, I also remember him just sort of asking me, are you even trying? And I don't think I'd ever tried harder at anything in my life before.
The supervision system in Cambridge is great in that it gives us one-to-one, like 2-to-1 academic tuition. But when supervisors can range massively from PhD students to people who have been here for 50 years, the level of training they have received can vary massively, and the amount of empathy they have with students varies massively. And actually, the pressure that different supervisors put on you can really have a strong mental health effect.
I'm sorry I need an extension again this week on my essay, and I'm sorry to ask for it again. And the fear in sending those emails, the terror in lying in my bed, which is usually where I wind up because I haven't got out of bed all day and physically can't sometimes. The terror in sending those emails is enough to almost, shut me down altogether in and of itself, because I never quite know what the response will be. People say to me all the time, okay, but we do receive training. And if people are receiving training, it's clearly not effective training, or it's not training that is targeted at the actual issues that students are facing.
I think the university would say that training is available.
There is training that occurs and extensive training is available.
Individuals whose role is fundamentally academic, I think they should receive a degree of training around the sorts of signs to look out for in respect of student mental ill health and what to do. Certainly supervisors should be in a position to provide them with appropriate support and guidance. I think quite often that support and guidance is to give them the advice as to who to go and see when they've identified that there is a student with a particular mental health concern.
All academics with student-facing roles know when to refer students who need support to the people who are best placed to provide it.
How likely are you to refer a student to the counselling service?
So I didn't know that was something we could do.
I didn't know I could formally refer.
I have no idea how I'd go about referring a student. I didn't know that I could.
I was Director of Studies and I received no training for that.
My supervisor training was, I think, 10 till 4.
I did supervision training in the first year of my PhD. It was a 2-hour session.
I can't remember there being any discussion of words like empathy, compassion, health, awareness.
They just read out stuff like don't attack the students, supervisions last an hour, you should read their essay, drink some coffee beforehand.
For first aid training, it's mandated every 3 years so that those learned pathways are maintained. Supervisor training isn't repeated at all.
I think they just assumed I'd been here a long time and I know how it works.
I was not given safeguarding training.
Supervisors don't get safeguarding training.
Even things like where is appropriate to supervise or not.
I remember one literally did my supervision in my bedroom.
What do I do if a student breaks down and starts crying?
When he questioned me about that, I broke down into tears, and then 2 minutes later I was joined by another supervision partner who's also crying.
Supervisors dating either their own students or students from the faculty.
I've heard a lot of stories.
A friend of mine dated a student who was supervised by them on the MPhil. As a supervisor, you're not just teaching. If your student is ill or can't do the exam, you'll be asked to give an expected grade, and so this isn't just a question of affecting what a student learns, it's literally the grades they leave with. I have absolutely no idea what I would look for to know somebody was struggling with their mental health.
I would have really graphic images enter my mind.
Unless they were visible physical markers, if they were crying, if they had visible scarring or something.
Uncomfortable sensations in my body.
Even if the work started to suffer, my first thought would not be that it was a mental health situation at all.
Feeling like I was trapped in sort of my own flesh prison.
People who have a tendency towards perfectionism or obsession, which could very easily tip into being a problem. It sounds horrendous, but sometimes it can actually benefit academic work.
Feeling like I would really like to be dead.
It was emphasised that if there was a doubt, you had to go to the student's director of studies, but I don't know how I would know if I had those doubts.
Right, so I have this little booking system on my computer that I can go to book extra training sessions or something, but I don't get paid to do that, which means you lose time for your own projects, so most people don't have time for that.
Your payment is linked to the supervision reports that you submit.
You don't get paid to prep at all, you don't get paid for marking at all.
You're teaching a topic that you don't really know.
You don't get paid for arranging supervisions at all.
You feel like you don't have enough time to read someone's essay.
You don't get paid for any admin at all. You don't get paid to write supervision reports at all.
When I started, I would spend absolutely ages preparing, like all week preparing to do whatever, 3 or 4 supervisions, maybe less.
So you have to take on more students to balance that out, because the more students you take on, the cheaper it becomes to prepare for the supervision.
So it probably ended up being paid £2 an hour.
It also means that as a supervisor, if I have to rush off at the end of a supervision, I can't stay and be like, are you okay?
This kind of ramping up of the workloads only negatively impacts students.
If one of my students intermits, I've lost a student, which means that over the course of a term, that's £90 to £100 down. Over a year, that's £300 down. I don't want my students to intermit, partly because I will lose money if they do. My life becomes more financially unstable if I make that kind of recommendation. That's a lot of money to lose, right? And so you obviously don't want your students to intermit. But I don't think a supervisor is less likely to then say that if you have problems, you should talk to college. I think most supervisors will help the student do that. The thing is that most supervisors would happily go to paid training because you want to get better as an academic. You want to be taught these things.
A supervisor might not think that they're in a pastoral role, but at the end of the day, they're the one who has the most contact with the student.
So I think right at the heart of it is supervisors need to be aware that any of their students could be facing a mental health issue and knowing what the appropriate advice and guidance is. And actually, in some cases, it would be inappropriate to intervene somebody who doesn't have extensive experience of providing mental health support.
People with good global functioning, people who are of average to above intelligence, tend to manage a lot better with their mental health disorders, can compensate a lot more, particularly younger people. These things can be ticking on in the background without them realising, and often it takes someone else in order to be able to point out that they're ticking a lot of the boxes that you need to tick in order to be diagnosed.
Students that are quietly in their room, not socialising, they're the ones that it's very easy to think, oh, they're fine, I haven't heard from this student for a while, but that we need to be making sure that we're meeting and spending real quality time listening to students across the board.
My grades never really suffered, and so there was never a we need to come in and talk. And had I chosen to, I probably could have simply never told anybody. The only person that really realised was my supervisor.
In my first meeting with my director of studies as a fresher, I was told that if I had pastoral problems, I must go to my tutor. If I had academic problems, I could go to him. My pastoral problems were totally entwined always with my academic work. They were mostly due to the fact that I had these 16 essays, and I felt like he had closed the door.
People have come to me while I've been the supervisor because they haven't had a good relationship with their director of studies.
You don't know who the first person someone's going to turn to.
Good training would be an immense boon to every student in the university, irregardless of their mental health conditions.
I think this is where students have to understand that the university is just a collection of people doing their jobs. And it's very easy to be angry at this big conglomerate. If we want to improve this, we have to have them on side. We have to appreciate the work that they do.
If you don't recognise somebody's wider humanity and the needs that might come with that, I don't think you can educate them.
I wouldn't trade 10% of student happiness for better academic performance.
They can come and see me in the afternoons, we go for walks, we go for coffee.
Created 3 new posts, 2 in the counselling service and 1 in the disability resource service.
We recognise, however, that we have more work to do to ensure that across Cambridge the support students receive is the best it can be.
Students just want it explained to us why it's difficult. Just be honest with it. People can accept that it's flawed, but just don't present it as this perfect thing, because it isn't.
And it is really tough for administrators and faculty to take these very real emotions that people are feeling and turn them into sort of actionable items.
One of my friends, his supervisor, deliberately arranges supervision on Saturdays to stop people doing extracurricular activities.
They're suspicious that we don't work hard enough. They're suspicious that we don't understand what it means to be at Cambridge. They're suspicious that we don't do our own work. They're suspicious that we aren't achieving our potential.
I remember in first year having one supervisor who just relentlessly bashed me no matter what I did, and then came out on my supervision report, he predicted me a really high grade, and I was like, you've put me through so much trauma all year.
My gran died and I got back from a funeral and I felt really depressed, and my DOS went like, she may have been your favourite granny, but these things happen, I still expect the essay on Monday.
An academic has expressed the view that letting in people like me who didn't have who had non-standard qualifications and non-standard life experience and background is a mistake, and they could let in easier people that they will be easier to deal with.
Actually, that had such a massive effect on my confidence.
And then they're suspicious that we don't suffer in the way that we say we suffer.
I was like, am I not meant to be at Cambridge? I was really close to my gran.
It would be amazing if, the university could act in a compassionate way and consider themselves compassionate. That was the thing that was totally missing from my experience.
I think there are some very practical things, though, that are easily accomplished on a smaller scale. One is to lead with empathy. I think in supervisions that would mean, when an essay doesn't come in on time or when a piece of work isn't the quality that you might expect of it, not starting out with, why are you not taking this seriously? Why do you not care? Why are you wasting both of our times? But saying what happened here and how can we work to make it better?
What do you want a university to be? A university can be a place where people come and have a horrible time, develop unhealthy behaviours and bad mental health and go off and hate it for the rest of their lives. Or it can be an amazing place where people come and learn stuff and become better people.
People are very apprehensive about taking into account lived experiences of students when it comes to reshaping things, because they don't feel like they're empirical enough, or they don't feel like these great traditions have lasted for so long and they've worked just fine, and maybe it's just students now that are having a problem. I don't think so. I don't think, I think you could go back a long ways looking at what people were writing earlier in the 20th century, in the 19th century. People have been having emotional struggles here forever, and it's just now that we're starting to listen to them and starting to open up this conversation with them and open it up in a substantial way. Just because we're noticing it now doesn't mean it hasn't always been there. My name is Christopher Mergen. I'm a finalist here at Cambridge. And I suppose the one thing that I would want most for the university to do is to treat emotions as another form of knowledge and to not relegate them to sort of the dustbin of human experience that is not so much
and in my science English, I've struggled with
Friends is a big issue. It's important that we are here and listen to you and